We're here at the Web 2.0 Summit. With me, I have Chris Poole from 4chan, in fact, the founder of 4chan. So how are things over at 4chan these days?
Things are good. Let's say I just turned 8 years old, October 1st of this year.
Were you expected you'd be 8 years ago?
No. I was 15 when I founded it, and so it's been quite the trip.
Yeah. Well, so what have you learned about online community along the way?
I think that I've learned more about what not to do than what to do. I mean, because 4chan itself is modeled after another community. It's modeled after a Japanese website called Futaba Channel. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, I kind of had this brief stint where I started watching a lot of anime and like Japanese cartoons, and I found Futaba and thought to myself, oh wow, this is really incredible, and nothing like this exists for kind of English speakers, like Western kind of culture. And so I translated it and hosted it. And a lot of its success has come from the fact that it was kind of very different at the time. It was this image-based form of communicating that wasn't really quite popular in the U.S. and kind of elsewhere. And it's grown kind of steadily and organically over all these years. And we've made a lot. There's been a lot of work put into it in terms of deciding creating a homepage, doing news posts, recruiting volunteers, creating a rule set, adding new boards, and trying to guide it. But it was something that is kind of grown just as a natural process over the years. And so I think that if anything, I've deserved more credit for not making mistakes, for not pulling a Facebook and pissing everybody off once every 6 months like clockwork. And I've done things that have upset people over times, things that people didn't agree with. But it's more that I've learned about how do you kind of try to be stride the happy medium rather than kind of going to the extremes. And I think that as part of my talk today was part of the message.
The thing with Facebook, and they may be upset, but then the users aren't leaving. Right. What we can tell. What's going on there?
It's a lack of alternatives. It's very hard to migrate off of Facebook because that's where your graph is. And frankly, for a lot of people, for a lot of uses, it is a good product. I use Facebook. 800 million or so people use Facebook. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's, I think, not great at everything, and they're just kind of sometimes insensitive to these decisions that they've made. And part of it is just educational. A lot of users kind of will react really negatively to something that they don't understand, like some of the profile changes that they made a few months ago, and people reacted really negatively to it, but really nothing much had changed. They just needed to do a better job of communicating what those changes were. But it's hard to leave, like any kind of walled garden. Right.
Well, the costs of leaving become bigger and bigger as more people join. Facebook has a real names policy in theory. In practice, there's some wiggle here and there, but that's the standard. And certainly we've seen with Google Plus, there's been quite a lot of controversy around that famous NIM wars online. What's the role and importance of anonymity online? Should that be something that's held up as an important thing for communities as they become created to keep, or to countries to protect?
It's absolutely important, and I think it's more important as a contrast to, again, people kind of paint this in black and white when it really isn't, but you need something, nothing should be one, there's no one right way of doing anything, and I think that most people view anonymity as what's kind of the natural opposite to something like a Facebook identity. And with Plus, I think that Google really missed this huge opportunity to really innovate in a way that Facebook hasn't, and to support this idea that you are many people. Christopher Poole with a face is different than Christopher Poole without a little picture. Is different than Chris. Is different than Moot. We're all different people depending on the context in which we're faced. We're different people in front of different audiences, and Google could have used that opportunity to support kind of this fluid identity. One of the things I talked about was prismatic identity. This idea that, again, you're multifaceted, and it's not just who you're sharing with; it's who you're sharing as. It's really a piece of you is changing. Somebody's seeing a different a face of you, and Google could have done a better job at really just being like, that's totally it. Let's run with that. And instead, they've deleted accounts without real names. They don't even allow you to pick a vanity URL or usernames. It's even worse than Facebook is in that sense. So
one of the constant back and forth you see in the media community is whether you need to have someone's real name to have a good community on a site. Is community about having real names on the internet, or is it something more?
No, because identity is not real names. I think it is about having an identity or some amount of accountability within a community, and you can even have accountability in an anonymous community. I mean, 4chan is, I believe, the most accountable place on the web, because if you're an outsider to 4chan, I mean, so there are no structural barriers to using a site like 4chan. Anybody can come in and enter it and use it, and yet you can't, because in lieu of these kind of structural barriers, the community has erected these kind of socio-cultural barriers to understand the community, to the language, and how to kind of act on the site. And if you were a new user and you post, I mean, there's this concept of lurk more. People will identify that immediately and will kind of like reject you and will be like, you need to lurk more. You need to kind of understand us before you start to try to be one of us. And so again, you don't need a full name for somebody to say, well, and a registration date or user ID for somebody to say, oh, that guy's new. Of course he needs to lurk more. I mean, people can just tell by the way that you interact. And so I think you can have accountability in anonymous communities, and so you don't need a real full name. And I think that most people draw this as kind of anecdotal evidence that's drawn from. YouTube comments have been historically like pretty horrible, like the things that people say. But then again, like they have a username that's persistent across YouTube as a service, and that username is now linked to a Google address. And so clearly, they are very accountable in terms of having a persistent identity, being accountable to kind of Google, and yet people, for whatever reason, feel like they can just be total jerks on YouTube. And I think that, again, has more to do with the community, because that community has been kind of accepting of that. There are many communities on YouTube, and then the ones where you see a lot of these bad comments, I mean, they don't really discourage this in the same way that you see in other sites. So there's not a one-to-one relationship between a real name and an identity.
So when you look forward to the sort of future of other people trying to create communities or trying to fix the ones that they have, what are the things they should not do?
I think to try to prescribe, this idea that there is one you. That is Facebook's vision of the world, is that there is one you, and who you are online is who you are offline. The example I used earlier was Google and Facebook kind of think of you as a mirror, that you have one reflection, and the reflection that you see in that mirror is what everybody else sees. And again, not true. People are multifaceted. People are more like diamonds. You can look at a diamond or a person from any angle, and you can see something different, and yet it's still the same. And I would encourage them to think about, and it's not just about again, anonymity versus full names, but to encourage people to think about choice is not necessarily a bad thing. Giving your users the options to choose how they're identified on the service is something that you want to do. And again, you can incorporate something like Facebook Connect. You can use it to authenticate a user to kind of ensure that they're maybe not a troll or a spam bot. But then, just because you're using Facebook Connect doesn't then require that you make them post with a full name and a profile photo. So I think being very aware of the fact that we as humans are identity is a very complex concept, and to allow that flexibility in a web product.
So last question: when another site on the internet, whether it happens to be an individual person, a blog, a media site, whatever, happens to invoke the wrath of 4chan, they can sometimes receive a great deal of traffic, or sometimes more difficult attacks, right? And when I say attack, I mean only in the technical sense, right? The idea that there are some very technically able people that are part of your community. To what extent can you look ahead to the future of the way the web is evolving and shape the conversation with that amorphous group of people when something happens that the offline world doesn't understand, and when there's a great deal of focus put upon another website? Is it the fault of the website owner? Is it the community? How should we understand what's happening there?
I think, this kind of mob mentality or groupthink is something that's existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. Look at any war, basically, especially one that's motivated by religion. People are able to get riled up in kind of mass quantities, given the right kind of spark. I think that now more than ever, it's not just 4chan. It's more this group Anonymous, something that a lot of people have kind of, if you trace back the genesis of that group, which is now something very separate from 4chan and other, it really is its own very distinct thing. But now more than ever, we see it in the news every day. We hear about, and not just them. With Occupy Wall Street, that was General Assembly, and that was but there was a lot of different groups came together, and we're now seeing kind of more than ever this mobilization of online forces, not only online but also offline, And I think that people are, that change happened so rapidly just over the course of, I think, the past 3 years, that we're still kind of coming to terms with that. I don't know. I mean, the future of groups is I mean, it's so hard, it's so unpredictable. I mean, that's why, personally with 4chan, I've always felt that, again, I'm kind of no more than a shepherd. Like, I'm the guy, who only has a certain, maybe I'm at the wheel, but I don't control the wind. And so, given the wind, I can only, I have a limited control over the direction of the site, and I've always tried to maintain it as something where, it had a very kind of basic set of rules, and kind of believing this almost invisible hand, kind of like John Locke style, invisible hand of community moderation, where we can kind of do some very basic things, set some basic boundaries, but more or less it needs to come from the community itself. A community at a certain point needs to kind of self-regulate.
Any principles for self-regulation that exist on a 4chan?
Well, there's some basic rules that just say, don't be totally crazy and break the law. We're still figuring that one out.
Okay. Well, I think we're all still figuring this one out as we move forward. So I appreciate you talking with us today. If you're not familiar with it, 4chan is still one of the more dynamic communities online. And Chris was kind enough to stop by here at the Web 2.0 Summit and talk about identity and then some. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.